once everybody is sufficiently paying attention, can I have a quick show of hands? How many people here are interested in finding out about all the iPads and options for them and things like that? Show of hands, anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4? Yeah, okay, so some people are. 5, Graham, yep. So basically what I've got here is a presentation I've put together which goes into a fair amount of detail on all of the iPads. It'll probably take about half an hour to get through it. I'm thinking I'll defer that because how many people here want to think about new iMacs? That's a bigger number, yeah. So I think I'd rather talk about the iMacs first, and then we can go. I can summarise this and make the presentation available for those who want to look at a more leisured pace. So if I just go through it very quickly, just to give you an idea of what's in there. So I've got a brief summary of what's on the two new models that came out, the 3rd generation iPad and the 5th generation iPad mini. And then I've got a whole section on how to choose an iPad, including that very useful picture that Apple gave, which shows you the physical sizes of them next to each other. So, and then I've gone through a price chart showing all of the models at various capacities and models, so you can see them all side by side. All the features they've got in common. And then recommendations for each of the family members, and sort of like you start on the assumption you want an iPad Air, and then if you want this feature or this feature or this feature, go that way kind of thing. So I've sort of done it as everything about the iPad Air. iPad Mini is an alternative. Standard iPad is an alternative. iPad Pro is an alternative, and then I've got a section at the end covering drawing options, so the Apple Pencils and alternatives. So there's the original Apple Pencil, the Apple Pencil 2, and the Logitech Crayon, which are the 3 options available now for drawing things. That's all I've done for that presentation. So we can go through that in a bit more detail later on, but I'd rather get on with talking about the iMac stuff first, since that's of genuinely more interest. Yep, exactly. That's what I was thinking. So I thought it'd be useful for that as well. If I find numbers, which for some reason isn't running, do you want my screen thing running?
Yeah.
What's it called? I can never remember the name of it. Do you remember the name of the application? It's always one that I have to remember. It's not called Screen. Switcher. Thank you. Switchcast, that's the one. Now I'm currently using the church's Wi-Fi, which I actually WCOSP. So okay, it seems to be working all right then. All right, so that should be all right. So if I go to numbers, I have created, not that one, file, open, recent. Where's he gone? Lost my document. Find my document again. iCloud Drive. Oh no, that was in Keynote. It was in numbers. It was presentations. It should be in there. What did I do with it? Oh, I know. Yep. It's buried inside this big spreadsheet I've been maintaining with all of the various options. There it is. There we go. Right. iMacs. Yes, just fits on the screen. Good. So, if we start by looking at what Apple has actually got on their website, /nz/iMac. So what Apple have done basically is they've got, and I'll go straight to the buy page rather than looking at the advertising blurb. So if we go to the buy page on Apple's website, there are the 21.5 inch and 27 inch iMacs, which are the 2 series. So as the previous generation came out in the middle of 2017, so we now have nearly 2 years later, they've got a new range of iMacs. And you'll notice they've tagged all but one of them new. So the important point to be aware of is that the bottom cheapest iMac, the 1849 model, is not a new model. It's actually the 2017 one with 0 changes. It's exactly the same one you could have bought last year. So every other iMac is a new model with a later generation processor. That also shows up in the description here. It says dual core 7th generation, whereas that one's quad core 8th generation. So they've got newer processors in the middle and top 21.5s and in all the 27s. The 27s are all new. 21.5s, 2 out of 3 are new. Okay? So the other thing that didn't change was the price. So Apple basically did a component upgrade on ignoring the cheapest model. They replaced the CPU and they did a very small update to the graphics capability, and in some cases the memories got faster as well. But otherwise, the prices have not changed and the overall appearance of the computer has not changed. The screen is the same, the ports on the back are all the same, so nothing fundamentally has changed. It's really just a speed bump, is the usual term that is used for these sorts of things. So on that front, I see that Graham, when he did the cover, Capital Apple, said iMac gets a 2 times performance boost, and I immediately said, what? I don't know where you got that number from. Apple's website, okay. Alright, so I'm wondering what on earth they're talking about there, because I can't think of anything that's twice as fast on these new iMacs compared to the previous iMac. I think what they're talking about is the multi-core performance, because the new processors have got more CPU cores in them, which means rather than having a dual-core processor, you now have a quad-core processor. So that makes it twice as fast, because it can run twice as much stuff at the same time, and it's a bit faster overall. So yes, in 2 times asterisk in certain cases is probably the best way to put that, and that only affects CPU performance, which is usually the last thing that most people actually need more of for general use on a computer. The most important thing that most people run into a performance problem with is the storage, because that's the time it takes to start up the computer, the time it takes to launch applications. If you're working with very, very big documents, that will be a limiting factor, but that's mostly application launching. Hang on, Mac, if I go back to there and just find the page that Graham had, which is the advertising blurb one. It was on the right hand side, wasn't it?
Yeah, keep going.
Brightness, quite the power couple, there. Yeah. Okay, so yes, so Apple is claiming up to 60% faster CPU performance with a footnote 1 for the 21.5-inch model, and the 27-inch model is up to 2.4 times faster CPU performance, but that's because they've got more cores and the whole CPU speed is faster, and that may also be measuring the fastest possible CPU option you can get rather than the standard one. I can't be certain. The graphics, again, up to 50% faster graphics, footnote 2, so where are these footnotes? What's the small print? Right down the bottom, 1 and 2. 1 says, testing conducted by Apple using pre-production 3.2 GHz 6-core Intel Core i7 based 21.5-inch iMac with 32 gigs of RAM, yada 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 yada. So they've been testing it with particular software and things like that. It doesn't actually, oh yeah, and they've got Vega 20 graphics. So yes, that's the graphics performance test is definitely using one of the more expensive upgrade options, not the standard graphics that comes with it. And they've also got maximum RAM and a few other things and using high-end software. So there are certain things that will be faster and potentially as fast as that, but you shouldn't assume that for most stuff.
Does maximum RAM help?
Only if you're running software that needs it, generally. So I'll come to that anyway. Yep, I'll mention that. So I want to make sure I'll use my article for reference, because that's got pretty much covered all the stuff on the article already. So, okay, going back to the buy page again, just so we can look at the specs. So if you walk into a retailer and they have an iMac on display, or they can sell you an off-the-shelf one which they've got in the back room in stock, it will be one of the standard configurations you see on Apple's website. So the list of specs you see down the bottom of this page is the same as what the retailers will sell you. And you can walk into the shop and walk out with one if they've got them in stock. If you order one through Apple's website, this is where the custom configurations come in. For each of these models, you can click, when you click the select button, I'll just pick the top one as an example, you go to a new page which shows you the current price of the configuration you've chosen, and you can customize many features, most of which will cost you more money. So you can get a faster processor, you can get more memory, you can get better graphics depending on the model, you can get more storage or faster storage. You can also, this one's actually a bit buried, you can change the keyboard if you click on the change link there,
and you can get the one with the numeric keypad if you want that. I was going to bring my numeric keypad along tonight just so you can see what the larger keyboard looked like. I've got the space grey one rather than the white one, which matches my Mac Mini, but I already had enough to carry, and with the small back I didn't want to carry more stuff, so I decided against that. I can show you a picture if you need to know what it looks like. So, and notice there's lots of languages available which used to not be available here, so that's quite strange. Hide options, the prices are a bit different to what I expected. Okay, so the interesting point is that the configuration options available vary depending on which model you start with. So that's the top end 21.5. You can increase the processor, you can increase the memory, you can increase the graphics, you can increase the storage. I won't worry about the mouse and trackpad, that's the same for all of them. So to avoid having to go through all these pages and look at them in detail, here is a chart I prepared earlier showing you all of the configuration options for the iMacs of each one. If you can read that, because the text is quite small to make it fit. So down the left hand column are the 6 base models, and then you've got processor upgrades, the memory upgrades, the graphics upgrades, the storage upgrades, mouse and trackpad I've just put there because it's available on the page for all of them the same, and keyboard are the same as well. The interesting patterns that pop out is you see that there's one processor option there and 2 for these ones. One processor option and 2. Memory, 8 or 16, and then you get the 32 gig option as long as you don't get the cheapest model. Same in the 27s, you can go up as far as 32, or you can get up to 64 if you get the middle or high model. Graphics is standard, or an upgrade option. Standard, or an upgrade option. And also the graphics gets better as you go up in more expensive base models as well. So that's integrated graphics, reasonably okay dedicated graphics, slightly better dedicated graphics, slightly better again when you go to 27, slightly better again going up one more, and then slightly better again going up the top one. So basically you get slightly better graphics the bigger the starting point is. Storage, I'll come back to this point because it's a very important one we need to make sure I cover. So you get few options, lots of options, and not quite so many options because it actually started one step further up to begin with. You can't downgrade the storage to a hard drive in the more expensive model. It starts with the Fusion drive. So that's got the hard drive option, this one hasn't, otherwise the list is the same. In fact, no, not with this one, but when you go to 27, they start with a Fusion drive. You can go to a bigger Fusion drive or a solid state drive. The middle one you can get an even bigger Fusion drive, or a solid state drive, and the top one comes with a bigger Fusion drive to start with, and it doesn't give you the option of getting the smaller solid state drive. I assume you want more storage with that one, so you don't get the cheaper solid state option. And they also have a bigger solid state option at the far end as well. So you need to sort of if you're thinking about buying an iMac, you need to think about what are the features you actually need for your computer and what do you expect to do with it. And the basic idea, first of all, is that when you're considering buying an iMac, I strongly recommend you do not buy one that only has a hard drive in it. That means the entry-level 2017 model, the 1849 one, I'll go back to that page again, or the middle one, because they both come with a 1 terabyte hard drive. So if you're buying an off-the-shelf iMac, don't buy the 2 cheapest ones, because the computer will be so slow that you will get very frustrated with it very quickly. I know this because I was helping somebody who has that exact entry-level 2017 iMac. He found it so slow to do anything on it that he actually went and bought an external SSD and plugged it into a USB port and has installed his entire software and is running off that because it's so painful for him to actually use the internal hard drive. Now, if you have an older iMac model, you're finding, well, that's odd because I've got a hard drive in my iMac, why don't I notice that? There are 2 factors going on. The first one is, if you have a 2011 or earlier iMac, which has the larger, thicker body with the optical drive on the side, they all use a desktop-sized hard drive. That's a 3.5-inch hard drive mechanism. If you have a 2012 or later iMac, where they went to the really thin body and got rid of the optical drive, all the 21.5-inch ones use a laptop hard drive, which is the 2.5-inch one, and they are fundamentally slower than a desktop hard drive to start with. Which means that if you have a 2011 iMac, which is able to upgrade as far as High Sierra, it may perform a bit sluggishly compared to what it was back on Snow Leopard-ish, but it's not too bad. But if you replace that with an entry-level 21.5-inch iMac, it would suddenly get a lot worse because the drive is slower because it's a smaller physical drive, and the data is organised differently and everything. So,
does this apply to the Fusion drives?
I'll come back to that. So so just talking about plain hard drives at this point. So again, the key point is if you are buying an off-the-shelf iMac, don't buy the bottom two ones. The high-end 21.5 is a reasonable choice because it has a Fusion drive. So to explain again what a Fusion drive actually is, it is the same hard drive that you get in the cheaper models. So that's where you store the bulk of your data, but that adds a small solid-state drive. And the critical detail is that that is big enough to hold the entire operating system. So what happens is when you start up your computer, it's loading the operating system from the solid-state drive, plus it's got enough space left over for storing data quickly. So it makes enough of a difference to the performance of the computer that it takes away the really, really horrible performance that you get with just a hard drive. So it's most noticeable. I've got a 2014 Mac Mini which has a Fusion drive in it, and it's fine booting the computer. It doesn't take very long. Whereas I've tried it on a Mac with a hard drive, and I'm sitting there and waiting for it to finish loading everything. It is noticeably bad compared to having a Fusion drive. Unfortunately, Apple cheaped out on the Fusion drives in the last few years. They've gone to a very small one. It's only a 24 gigabyte solid-state drive, so it's not big enough to actually store in very much, but it is big enough to hold the operating system, which is the critical thing. No, you can't change that. If you buy an iMac that has a 2 terabyte or larger Fusion drive, they actually put a bigger solid-state drive in as well, but they don't tell you what the capacity is unless you go and look at the technical specs on one of the ones in the shop or something like that. And they usually don't have all the models in the shop, they only have one representative example. So it's a bit hard to tell. So I don't know the exact cut-off point, but basically if you buy one with a big Fusion drive, you get a bigger solid-state drive to go with it. So basically the Fusion drive makes the difference between, oh my god, this is horrible, and this is reasonably okay. But not earth-shatteringly fast.
So it's faster than the pre...
Yeah, overall, at least as far as the operating system goes, it's going to be faster than a
load up quicker.
Yeah, it'll start the computer faster.
Mine's getting pretty slow.
Yeah. But the other factor, which is a problem with the hard drives, is that as Apple's gone through recent operating system upgrades, they've increasingly emphasised solid-state drives as the expected configuration of the computer, and it optimises the behaviour of the computer, assuming it's got a solid-state drive. So if it hasn't got a solid-state drive, the operating system does not behave as well because it's trying to do too much at once. For example, it's indexing the hard drive. While it's trying to load an application, it might be doing something else in the background. So the problem is that the hard drive is going there going, finally caught up, and then it will let you do stuff. It's that sort of thing. Whereas with a Fusion drive, it's done all the operating system loading. It's still doing some of that stuff in the background, but it's not as bad. And so it doesn't have such an impact on the computer.
Is it reasonable then that, say, 512 gigabyte of SSD is faster than...
I'd better come back to that question because that's a separate issue.
Than,
so basically, think of the Fusion drive as you get effectively the same amount of storage plus a tiny bit, which isn't enough to matter. So all your data will live on the hard drive portion of the Fusion drive, as will most of your applications and things like that. Frequently used stuff and all the operating system goes on the fast bit. So effectively you treat it like a hard drive that's a bit faster than normal. So it's an improvement. If you're working with large and complex sets of data, if you're doing things like video work, for example, you'll probably find that the Fusion drive might be a limiting factor if you're needing to transfer data quickly from the drive. But for most part, data is not a problem because you're just generally loading a document and then working on it or something like that. And it doesn't actually need to do a lot of disk I/O. It's the loading of applications and the operating system booting where the real problems kick in, or the background indexing and all that sort of stuff. So, Fusion, basically, hard drive bad, Fusion drive okay. Now, getting back to my chart again. So if you're looking at the middle 21.5-inch model, the Fusion drive for that costs $170 as an upgrade. So that gives you an idea of what they're actually charging to give you the tiny wee solid state drive, which is a bit irritating. So if you were going to buy an off-the-shelf iMac and you don't really want to spend the 2,549 for the top end 21.5 inch iMac, you can actually custom order a middle 21.5 inch iMac with a Fusion drive and save a bit of money. So if you don't need the extra performance of the better processor and the better graphics, you can save a little bit of money and still get a Fusion drive in the middle one. But it's still going to cost you $2,199 plus 170. So it's about halfway between. What I haven't done here is a sort of a sum total if you choose this one option, because how do I do that with lots of options? It's getting too messy. I need to do a database with a selector or something like that. So the Fusion drive it costs an extra 170. So then comparing Fusion drives with solid state drives. So if you have to custom order an iMac always to get a solid state drive. They don't sell them with solid state drives yet as a standard option, standard feature I mean. So the solid state drive, the major thing you notice there is the capacity's gone down. So you're starting out with a 1 terabyte Fusion drive or hard drive and you go way down to a 256 gig solid state drive and the price goes up. So it costs $340 to move from a hard drive to a 256 gig solid state drive. Comparing the two, a solid state drive has no moving parts, which means that if your computer is doing lots of things at once, it's just basically waiting for the data to be transferred and that's it, done. With a hard drive, it's going to move the head to the right place, wait for the disk to spin around to the right point, and then it can transfer the data. And it may need to move around several times in the process of accessing certain files. So the major advantage of a solid state drive is eliminating that seek and rotation delay, which means that the entire computer is amazingly more responsive because you're not waiting vast amounts of time to do lots of stuff, which is just sitting there twiddling your thumbs away.
Keep the temperature down?
Maybe.
Arguably the mechanical.
Maybe,
producer.
yeah, I don't know.
Okay, just sorry.
Yeah, that one I'm not sure about. So, if 256 gigs is enough capacity, and you can afford the extra 340, that's definitely a worthwhile upgrade. As it happens, I was helping somebody buy a new iMac. They moved from a 2008 one to a 2014 one and jumped 8 operating system versions in one go, with a bit of help from me to go to a halfway version because you can't go that far in one go. We decided that 256 gig solid state drive was enough in that case because they only had a 250 gig hard drive and that was only a quarter full, so no problem. But if your current usage is well above 200 gigs, you're probably going to need a bigger solid state drive, and you also need to allow for the possibility that you're going to keep using this computer for maybe 7 to 9 years, and how much more data are you going to gather over that time. Yeah. So that will influence the choice for what storage you get, because the key point is that you should assume you can't justify replacing the internal storage within the lifetime of the computer. iMacs are not intended to be have internal upgradable components, with one exception, which is memory in the 27-inch model. That's got a slot on the back, a hatch you can still get to it. So you should consider carefully how much storage you need now, how much more it's likely to grow within the next several years, and that should be what you're aiming at, plus a safety margin. Basically, you want to add about 20% as a minimum safety margin. Ideally, you want to keep the drive at least 20% free space for performance reasons. It can get problematic if it gets too full. So, unfortunately, Apple has chosen to use very fast and very expensive solid-state drives, and they charge their unreasonably high prices as well. So, going to a 256 gig solid-state drive will add 340, and then it adds another 340 to double it to 512, and another 680 to double it again to 1 terabyte. So, if you actually need a terabyte of storage, you're looking at having to pay an extra $1,300 over the standard price of the iMac. So that's a very expensive upgrade. Yeah. So if you can't justify that much extra money just to get the extra performance, then what you might like to consider, which I mentioned in my article, is going for a smaller solid-state drive, but moving some of your data to an external drive. So you can actually get an external hard drive, plug it into a USB port, and use that to stick all your big data files on, but have your operating system, your applications, and your normal stuff on the internal drive. So that may be an option you can consider. Again, as I said with fusion drives, your data is usually not a performance limiting factor, so it doesn't matter that it's on a hard drive. It is of course important that if you do that, you have to make sure your external hard drive doesn't get removed accidentally while your computer's in use, and it also gets backed up, because by default Mac's Time Machine doesn't back up external drives, so you've got to make sure it's included in the backup. And that would obviously be a separate hard drive from your Time Machine backup drive, so that means you can have two hard drives typically plugged in.
If you put, say, all your photos on the hard drive, which is, or all your music or something like that, is that difficult to get at? Do you have to do anything else, or do you just work it the same way? Do you
Okay,
click on iPhotos and...
pretty much. There's one step involved in telling it you've moved it. So when you launch Photos, you can hold down the Option key and pick a different library. And then you specify where that library is, and that's the one it will use until you tell it otherwise. So if you plug an external hard drive in, you copy your Photos library to that hard drive, you then run Photos holding down the Option key and tell it to use that one, then that's the one it will use.
That's the only time you do that?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
As long as
you don't unplug it.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah.
And there are a few extra steps involved, which if anybody wants to do this, I suggest you just talk to me or email me first just for extra advice, because you probably want to make sure it's correctly formatted with the Mac and a few other things like that. So there's extra steps involved in setting it up. But once you get it up and running, it just basically gives you the option of probably having a much faster computer by having a solid-state drive, but you've still got plenty of storage by using something external to store all your bigger files. But the Photos library is easy to do. iTunes is also easy to do in the same way. You can have your entire music library on an external drive. Random documents of your own, if you have large collections of anything big, movies or anything like that. If you're managing it yourself in Finder, it's only a matter of you moving them to a different folder effectively and accessing them in a different way. And you can use aliases and things to make it easier to locate them from their normal place. So once you've got it set up, it's not hard to maintain it. But if you can afford it, it's certainly more convenient having a larger internal drive with enough storage space.
And you could add a hard drive at any time, couldn't you?
External one, yeah.
SSD.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if you start getting...
Yeah, if you're finding you're running out of space, then that's when you start thinking, okay, maybe I should add a hard drive and move something big to it. There are also some other options you might want to consider. If you've got enough internet connection, you can use Apple's iCloud Drive feature if you don't mind subscribing to iCloud for however much you want to pay per month, and you can get up to 2 terabytes of storage via iCloud. So you could actually take advantage of the ability to have your photo library and your desktop and documents folders actually all stored in iCloud, and your computer only needs to cache the things you're actually accessing. So it doesn't matter that you've got a small solid-state drive. All the data lives in iCloud, and you've still got access to all of it as long as you have an internet connection, even though your drive might be quite a lot smaller. So that's also something, I didn't mention that in my article, but that's also a possibility. Other online options would be similar. Margaret?
At what distances will aliases work? I've sometimes used them in my computer only to try and open up an alias, and it says that the original can't be found. So I know I've done something wrong with...
Usually that will happen if you've done something like you've deleted a file and then copied it back on a different place or something like that. Aliases should automatically adapt to... now hang on. Assuming the file system is a Mac native one, so HFS Plus or APFS, Apple's new one, then the alias is able to locate a file if you rename the file, move the file to a different folder, rename the folder. As long as you don't move it to a different drive, it will be fine, or a different partition.
You were talking about moving it to a different drive here
Yep.
into iCloud.
So
can you use an alias for that or not?
I believe so. The iCloud one's a bit more complicated because it actually has a sort of a fake. It fakes the interface with it if you've got your documents in iCloud, for example. But if you've got it on a different drive, it's just basically once you've created the alias, if your alias pointed to the original one that was on your internal drive, that alias will not work to point to the external drive, but you can create a new alias which points to the external drive, and that will work fine afterwards. You can have an alias which points to a different drive. That's not a problem. But moving a file to a different drive will break existing aliases you previously created.
Right. But you still need to create an alias before you can move it to that.
No, you don't. You just remove it and then you create the alias afterwards. You don't need the alias in the first place because it was okay without it originally. It's only because you've
Put it on hard drive.
you may not even need the alias. It's just if you're used to something being in a certain place and you now have it on another drive, you can create an alias where it used to be to say it's over there now, so you don't need to think about it. You just go to where it used to be, and that you follow the alias yourself to go to where it is now.
But I didn't quite catch that. I might ask you at the workshop.
Yeah. Okay, so but basically it's not. It's just I'm just thinking of that as an extra option you could consider. Obviously, if you have a laptop, you don't have the option anymore. All of Apple's laptops come with solid-state drives, so if you want more internal storage, you've got to pay a lot more money for the bigger solid-state drives. To give you an idea of the relative speed, the hard drive probably transfers data something like up to 150 megabytes per second. It might go faster than that, might get 200 or 300-ish on some faster ones, once it's got to the right place and it's transferring consecutive data and things like that. The solid-state drives, when reading, generally transfer data on the ones Apple are using now at up to 2.6 gigabytes per second. So we're talking 10 times faster read speed and no delays getting to the data. Writing, however, you should be aware that the smaller your solid-state drive is, the slower it writes, because the bigger ones have more, basically they've got memory chips which hold all the information, they've got more of them in parallel, and they're able to write to more of them at the same time. Then the write speed is slightly limited. So the 256 gig ones are still a hell of a lot faster than the hard drive, but the 512 ones are twice as fast again for writing, and the 1 terabytes are probably twice as fast again.
Writing means putting out.
When you're writing data onto the drive. So if you're capturing video or something like that, and you're trying to capture 4K video at full frame rate with no compression as fast as you can possibly go, you may find that the 256 gig solid state drive is a limiting factor, but the higher capacity ones will be fast enough that it won't matter, that sort of thing. But I think it gets up to, the highest capacity ones are writing as fast as they can read, and the medium capacity ones are still 600 to megabytes per second, so they're still 4 times faster than the hard drive for writing data. So you will definitely feel that the computer is an awful lot better with having any solid-state drive, but if you're at all concerned about the write performance, you may want to get a bigger drive than you might otherwise.
Do you couple that speed with the processor?
Right, I'll come back to that. So,
because they're two
yeah,
don't they?
for a general use computer, for a home user, the storage is the single most important factor for the performance, because that's the thing that you've got to bump into all the time. If you are doing anything more advanced with your computer, where you're running software that actually is doing large-scale calculations or processing data or generating graphics or anything like that, that's where you need to start thinking about which model do I get, what processor has it got, and what graphics has it got. So if you're just wanting a computer for home use, for email, word processing, web browsers, all that sort of stuff, basically it doesn't matter, they'll all be fine in terms of processor and graphics. There's no real worry about it. There may be some disadvantages to getting the cheapest 21.5-inch iMac because it's only got integrated graphics rather than a dedicated graphics processor, but that usually only matters for software that actually is needing, it might limit your ability to run certain advanced software at all because it needs a dedicated graphics processor. But if you're not running that sort of software, even that doesn't matter. I've bought a 2018 Mac Mini which has pretty much the same graphics as that, and I haven't noticed any problems with it so far, except I probably can't run some of my games and that sort of thing. So, not a big problem. So, the processor options, the main thing really to pay attention to here is the number of cores. Don't worry about the speed numbers too much. The number of cores is going to matter if you are running several applications at once or more advanced applications. A dual-core processor means it can run 2 things at the same time. A quad-core processor runs 4 things at the same time. A 6-core processor, 6 times 6 things, an 8-core processor, 8 things. So if you are in the habit of doing something which is running stuff in the background and it's doing a fair amount of work, you will definitely notice a difference if you have a quad-core processor as opposed to a dual-core processor. And the more you've got, the more things you can have happening at the same time, basically. The number of cores also matters for software like video encoding, which is actually able to use the CPU to do parallel processing, because it can use them all simultaneously and it takes less time. So if you're doing anything like that, you may want to get one with more cores. So again, the entry-level iMac is a dual core. All the rest are at least a quad core, which is probably better than your existing, say, 7-ish year old iMac, because they're all probably dual core, so it's going to be better up front without having to do anything fancy. So now, the processor upgrade options are horrendously expensive, and if you look at this one, it's $510 extra cost just to go from a 3.6 gig quad core to a 3.2 gig 6 core. For most people, I don't even know who that's aimed at, because I can't think of a case where that would be a useful upgrade better than picking this model to start with. Because it's 0.2 gigahertz slower processor, but it's got 6 cores. So that's the most important thing. The difference here is, you notice it's smaller because you're starting with a more expensive processor. It's only 340. But that upgrade is really only worth it for somebody who is trying to push as much data as they possibly can, as fast as they possibly can through their iMac, and they have to choose a 21.5 inch iMac for some esoteric reason, like their desk isn't big enough. If you actually cared about it, doing that sort of work, you should be getting a 27 inch iMac, or possibly an iMac Pro. Because that's, if you're actually doing that sort of work, it's basically, don't even bother considering the processor upgrade options. You might want to consider where you're starting from in terms of the number of applications you run or how complex they are. So that may be a reason to get the top end 21.5 over the middle one, for example. When you get up into the 27s, they all start with 6 cores. You get an upgrade option to 8 cores. Again, that's going to be only for the people who really need it. And again, they might be better off buying an iMac Pro, because by the time you've got the top end normal iMac and you pay for the processor upgrade and you've got better graphics, you're potentially looking at $9,000 if you upgraded everything to the maximum, which is already more expensive than the cheapest iMac Pro. So that's only $8,500 or something like that. So just tread carefully with CPU upgrades. It's generally not worth it. Memory. All of them come with 8 gigabytes as standard. There are upgrade options available for 16 for all of them, and the bigger ones can all do, more expensive starting points can all do 32 gig, and the top end 27s can do 64 gig as well. The price for the memory upgrades, you'll notice, get very big very fast. So going to 32 gig is more than 4 times the cost, well, about 3 times the cost of getting a 16 gig upgrade. For most people, for home use, 8 gig is probably fine. There's very little point paying more money to get more memory. If you are running software that tends to need a lot of memory, that's working with large amounts of data, so things like Photoshop or other audio processing, graphics editing in large scale, video editing in large scale, that's probably where you need more memory. The other big case that people might run into is if you're running virtual machine software, so you want to run Windows in a virtual machine or another Mac OS version on a virtual machine. The virtual machine has to reserve a certain amount of memory permanently while it's running. So the more memory you've got, the more memory you can give to your virtual machine, and the more that's left over for your base Mac. 16 gig is a good number to start with if you want to run virtual machines on a regular basis. You can get away with it in 8 gig, but it's a bit tight. I've got 16 gig in this MacBook Pro, and that's fine for running. I can run three smallish virtual machines simultaneously if I need to. So I don't do that very often. I'm often testing multiple Mac OS versions, and I just start up one while I'm doing something on the other one, so it doesn't really cause a major problem. But it is starting to push it, and I'm thinking that I'll probably get 32 gig in my next one, but if I wasn't trying to do that sort of thing, I would probably be fine with 16 gig still.
If you've been used to 4 gig, then 8 is...
If you've been used to 4, then 8 will be better, yeah. The other important factor to keep in mind with the memory is if you're getting a 21.5 inch iMac, you cannot upgrade the memory after you bought it without pulling the entire computer apart, because it's on the back of the motherboard and it's inside. You've got to basically dismantle the entire case, take the logic board out, and then you can access the memory slots and replace the memory. It's definitely a service technician only job, not an end user job, and I wouldn't even try it myself, and I've taken some iMacs apart. So not recent, not 2012 and later ones, which you need to break. There's an adhesive layer which holds the screen on, so you've actually got to cut into the adhesive to get the screen off, and then you've got to replace it afterwards. I don't want to go there. So, from my perspective, I'm counting iMacs as not no components are upgradable in recent years. On the other hand, if you're getting a 27-inch iMac and you think you need more than 8 gigabytes, it's a very good idea not to buy it from Apple because it costs so much. The cost for getting the 16 gigs is still $340, but those machines have got an access hatch. They come with normally, I think, 2 memory modules, so there's 2 empty slots. So you can go and buy the right sort of memory from anywhere, and as long as you understand enough about how not to damage electronic components while handling them, or if in doubt, ask somebody to do it for you, me for example, or whoever you bought it from might be able to install it for you if you take the computer to them, then you can save an awful lot of money by buying it from afterwards, not from an Apple dealer, but from, because they may just want to sell you Apple's memory. But generally speaking, you'll probably halve the cost of the memory upgrades, or better, by getting it not from Apple. So that's worth keeping in mind if you think you need more memory. The other point is you can start with 8 and then you can upgrade it later if you decide this is actually causing me problems and I need more memory. So, and the way to tell that usually is to look at the memory pressure graph in System Profiler. No, what's it called? Activity Monitor. Sorry, Activity Monitor. That gives you a colour-coded. If it's green, you're probably fine. If it's orange, you're running low on memory. If it's red, you're in serious trouble. So that just gives you an idea of how close to the limit you are.
What was that called?
Activity Monitor. I'll just run it now, and I'll just zoom my screen back down so you can see it. If I go to the memory tab down the bottom here, it's got a memory pressure graph. It's just got a green blob at the moment. I've never seen that not green on my computer, but I have on other people's computers. It's occasionally been yellow, and I'm aware that it can go red if you're getting really tight. Yep.
Mine goes really quick on my iMac.
Yep.
I'm doing video stuff.
Yes.
And what I do is I shut the iMac up again. It's just fine.
Yeah, but basically, if it's going red, it means it's got so much memory being used, it's having to swap things out to disk all the time to make room for something else. So usually that's because the software has kept a lot of stuff in memory that it thinks it might need again. If you quit and run it again, it might be better. But that's only a temporary fix, and if you actually need to refer to it. Oh yeah, that helps. Well, not running so many applications. I tend to run a lot, so even with lots of applications running, 16 gig is fine. So, yeah. Okay, so that's memory. Graphics. The cheapest iMac is integrated graphics, which is not very good, but okay nowadays. So it's basically no good for 3D graphics, but okay for everything else. So if you're doing anything in, like games, for example, is the major category, or anything involving 3D graphics, don't get one with integrated graphics processor. It won't be good enough. The rest of them are all variations of Radeon Pros with bigger numbers. And if you look at the 2017 models, all they've done is they've added the letter X to them. Now, I think that means it's a later revision and it's slightly faster, but it's not enormously faster. It's just a slightly later, better build of the same graphics processor. So the graphics haven't actually got that much better than the 2-year-older models. Except that if you get the top end one of either the 21.5 or the 27, you now have the option of upgrading to a notably better graphics processor called a Radeon Pro Vega, which has a later generation graphics engine and more processing capability in the GPU. So if you're actually doing anything that is worth, you're actually needing high performance graphics for some reason, then that is possibly a worthwhile upgrade. I don't have enough experience with myself to recommend where the cutoff point is. You'd probably need to do some research online, and if you're in the category of doing that sort of stuff, you'll probably need to be researching it anyway to work out what sort of graphics card you need for your particular software. So that may limit how far down the line you can go in terms of models and that sort of thing. But basically, they're okay, good, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better is sort of the baseline, and much better if you go up, if you pay the big lump of money for the graphics card upgrade. But still, the iMac Pro's graphics is even better again because it starts with a Radeon Pro Vega with more processing units built into it, so it's better still again. Okay. Mouse or trackpads, they're all the same here, so I don't need to explain each one. The iMacs come with a Magic Mouse 2 and a Magic Keyboard by default. You have the option of replacing the mouse with a trackpad for an extra $70, if you prefer a trackpad, or if you want both a trackpad and the mouse, Apple will sell you the trackpad in addition to the mouse for $199.
It's an expensive trackpad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. They're very nice trackpads. I've got two of them. One on my Mac Mini in my lounge and one on my Mac Mini in my office. They work very nicely. All of these have integrated batteries, so the battery you can't remove it, and it's recharged by plugging it into the computer via a USB to Lightning cable. And it generally lasts about an order of a month if you're using it regularly before you need to recharge it. And the computer will tell you the battery level so you can keep an eye on it and plug it back in again when you need to. It's also worth noting that the trackpad and the keyboard can be plugged in and used left plugged in, because it'll just recharge the battery and then just use power through the cable. It'll just sit there fully charged quite happily. The mouse, you can't do that because the plug is on the bottom. You have to turn the mouse on its side to plug it in. You can't use it while you're doing that. You can't physically get on the table.
That's a bit of a nuisance, isn't it?
Yeah, but
swapping up batteries when
on the other hand, the charge time required to get it to a usable amount of time is only a few minutes. So you plug it in, you go away, make a cup of tea, come back, and you can use it for quite a while. So leave it plugged in overnight if you need to. Yeah, yeah.
I presume you can still use the
any older one works fine.
First mouse one. And
yep. Also worth noting, if you prefer a larger keyboard with a numeric keypad, Apple will sell you that instead of the normal one for an extra $50. So basically, it's the same keyboard with a numeric keypad on the right-hand side, so it's a center keyboard rather than standard. And it gives you the separate arrow key and home end, page up, page down block, all that sort of stuff, and more function keys, that sort of thing. Okay. Any questions?
Is it possible to get a copy of that?
Yes, I can share a copy of the spreadsheet page. I've also got notes at the bottom there on the various keyboard and trackpad options, including the more expensive space grey versions of some of them, and that's sort of the baseline point. But I don't particularly want to share the entire spreadsheet because it's got multiple tabs on it and things. But
Can you cut that out?
I can just extract one of them and make it available. Yep.
That would be terrific.
Margaret?
Yes, since we were talking about outlets before, why have they got Thunderbolt instead of USB-C? I thought Apple was moving to USB-C.
Well, Thunderbolt 3 is USB-C.
Right, are they the same shape?
It's exactly the same port.
So one equals the other, and it's just a question of which.
Yeah, so Thunderbolt 3 port, by definition, is also a USB-C port.
You said it had the capacity, I just didn't know that it had a shape different from the first Thunderbolt shape.
It does, yes. So Thunderbolt 1 and 2 share the mini DisplayPort connector, and they also carry the same protocols, so you can actually use them like a mini DisplayPort, but they support all the additional features of Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt 3 port has all the features of a USB-C, a standard USB-C port, because there's lots of things you can add to a USB-C port, but basically it's got USB-C plus Thunderbolt for the extra Thunderbolt features, plus it can be a display output port using the same capabilities as the earlier ones. So you can actually connect a display to a Thunderbolt 3 port using the right adapter or cable. So you can get a USB-C to HDMI adapter, for example, if you want to plug an external display into your iMac via one of those two ports. Yep. So if you just want to use it as a USB port, you can USB-C peripherals, such as one of my nice little portable USB solid-state drives. I'll just dig out again for show and tell. Right, so that's just so you know what I'm talking about. That's a Samsung T5. That's a 500 gig solid state drive. I can't remember offhand how much I paid for it, but it was ballpark $200 or something like that. And I think they got cheaper since then. So that's not as fast as Apple's internal solid state drives, but it's a hell of a lot faster than the hard drive. And when you buy one of these, it's got a USB-C connector on the drive itself, and it comes with both a USB, I'll pick up the wrong cables here, USB-C to C cable and a USB-C to A cable, so you can plug it into either an older USB port or a new USB port, just pick the right cable. So I just need to find my other cable now. So I've got the right here. Where's he gone? Where's he gone? Not part in there. They colour coded it as well, so I can tell them apart. Find it. My bag is getting cluttered. It needs to be decluttered. No, there it is. So they give you a grey cable tie or black cable tie, so you can tell at a glance which one it is. The grey is the older one, the black's the newer one. So if you have something like that, which has, or any other USB-C peripheral, you can plug it straight into the USB-C ports and just use it. If you want to plug in a high-performance multi-hard drive array which uses Thunderbolt for maximum speed, that will work fine. If you've got a daisy chain of Thunderbolt dock and various other things, that will work fine. Basically, as long as you've got the right cable and the right peripherals, you've got all the options available via the USB-C port. The USB-A ports are just USB 3.0, so the other minor detail is that the USB-C port and Thunderbolt 3 supports USB 3.1 Gen 2. Have I got that right? USB 3.0 was 5 gigabits per second for its super speed transfer rate. When they invented USB 3.1, they decided to rename the previous lot. So everything that was a USB 3.0 port is also a USB 3.1 Gen 1 port, which is the same speed, but it's ratified against the USB 3.1 standard. And they also have USB 3.1 Gen 2, which is twice as fast, 10 gigabits per second. So USB-C ports that Apple uses support USB 3.1 Gen 2. So they can go 10 gigabits per second for USB peripherals and 40 gigabits per second for Thunderbolt stuff. So Thunderbolt 3 is twice as fast as Thunderbolt 2, which was effectively twice as fast as Thunderbolt 1. So they've doubled it and doubled it when they've gone up generations. USB 3.1 Gen 2 has just caught up with Thunderbolt 1 in terms of speed. Theoretically, though, it's actually slower than that still, technically. Okay. Now that I've thrown all that technical gobbledygook at you, any further detail within that topic, or is there any other questions that people have got about the iMacs in general? Graham.
Just a quick one. Could you throw up your spreadsheet again?
That one, yep. Graham, yep.
The Magic Mouse has a trackpad on top anyway.
It's a trackpad-like surface, yes.
So what's the difference with the trackpad?
Okay, the Magic Mouse has a limited number of gestures you can do on it. It'll support scrolling using a finger sideways or vertically. It doesn't support, and it can do two-finger tap for, I think.
Yeah.
No, it uses position tap, doesn't it, for left or right click? It doesn't. You can't use two-finger tap. The trackpad can detect up to 5 fingers on it for different purposes, so you can actually do multi-finger gestures for different purposes, same as the laptop ones. So you can do, for example, slide down to get mission control. You can swipe between screens. You can do two-finger tap to get right-click rather than having to click in certain places, all that sort of thing. It's also a physically larger area, so you've got more space to work with. The mouse one is really intended just as a scroll wheel substitute, not as a multi-gesture thing. Okay. Force touch? Yeah, I think so. On the external one, I'm not sure because I've never used it for that. Certainly the internal ones can. Yeah. Yeah, not sure about that. I'd have to look that up because they actually have buttons. No, it's the older one that had buttons underneath the feet, which didn't work too well. The new ones. Yeah. 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 Okay. So, was there a particular thing you wanted to look at within my chart?
No, I was just looking at the 27.
Right, yeah. So, you can basically ignore the max price column. That's just, if somebody was insane and chose every most expensive option, it just gives you an idea of what the maximum price range is. So, they started about, $1,800 and get up to $9,000 if you chose everything, which is getting silly. Right, so any other iMac related questions? I'm noticing the time is already approaching 9:30, so do we want to talk quickly about iPads for those who are interested? I can just hop into my presentation again for that. Just quickly go through some details. If there are any particular questions people have about iPads they'd like to address now. So the two new ones, I'll just hop down to the end of that one. I'll make it available. I'm going to be sending an email out in the next week or two with the help desk details anyway, so I'll include links to the presentations which I'll make available through the website.
Oh, super. Thank you.
Yep. So don't feel you have to write anything down for this one. I'll make it available probably as a PDF rather than as a keynote presentation. So I've just helped somebody a couple of days ago with set up their new iPad Air, and so I've actually got a whole one for the first time rather than just seeing it in the shop. Incidentally, Shannon, has your shop got them yet? Do you know?
Not sure. I haven't ever confirmed.
No, okay, because it appears that the rollout to retailers of these new models is a bit spotty. JB Hi-Fi had them, then Noel Leemings had them, but Harvey Norman seems to not be giving them yet.
We've got stock, but I think we've got to wait till Apple guy
Right,
comes in there.
so they're not doing a run around all the shops and update them all like they sometimes do.
No,
And,
we have a specific guy, and he
Yep.
has to actually come in because they have to put their own software on them.
yep, that's right. It's actually a demo model, I think.
Yeah.
It's not a standard model.
Yeah.
Interestingly, every shop that I have been into when I've gone to see what they had set them all up the same way with the Apple Pencil alongside them. Every single Apple Pencil, with one exception I've picked up, has not been paired to the iPad it's sitting next to, so you couldn't use it. So I paired them for them. So I've gone around all the shops I've visited, I've fixed it for them. And it also appears that half of them haven't got correct powering arrangements because the pencil's batteries were flat. So they're plugged into a cable which is supposed to charge the pencil, but it's not actually doing it properly, so I don't know. So the standards are slipping, I think. So anyway, just to quickly summarise, the new iPad Air, now that I've actually held one, not tethered to a shop, they are surprisingly light. It's basically the same weight. If you're used to find the right bag, anything from an iPad Air or later, which was a 9.7-inch iPad, so that's one of the standard size iPads, it's my old iPad Air, that is. It's about the same weight as that, despite being bigger. So they've managed to. It's physically larger, but it's the same within 10 grams, I think, of the weight of an iPad Air. So don't worry about the fact it's got a bigger screen. It's no heavier. It's a bit slightly bulkier because the weight is more distributed further away from your hand, so it may not be quite as nice to hold in your hand. But it's a balancing thing. But it's pretty good. And as I noted there, it's basically replacing the 10.5-inch iPad Pro. Effectively what Apple's done is they've taken the 10.5-inch iPad Pro, taken out some of its more advanced features, put in a newer processor, and called it the iPad Air.
There's no 9.7s.
There is, but this is the iPad Air is the new model that got introduced. They're still selling last year's 9.7-inch iPad.
So that was second.
Sorry?
Second generation.
The 6th generation iPad, that one is. Yep.
Very confused. This one replaces my one.
Yeah. So if you had seen a 10.5-inch iPad Pro, this thing looks practically identical. The only obvious difference is it hasn't got the speakers on one side. It's only got 2 speakers, not 4 speakers. But there are a few other. It supports the same smart keyboard, the same Apple Pencil, and everything. So, but its processor is newer, which is good. So the other new one is the iPad Mini 5th generation, which is a long-awaited update because it's the 2015 iPad Mini 4 that it's replacing. So it's 4 years later, and they've finally, well, 3.5 actually. They've added support for the Apple Pencil, but not the smart keyboard. It's basically the same as an iPad Air shrunk down into the size of an iPad Mini. Not quite, because there's fewer pixels on the screen, but if it's the same, basically an iPad Mini is the same number of pixels as a 9.7-inch iPad shrunk down. So the 10.5 one's got a bit more room around the edges of this display at the same resolution, but the 7.9 minis don't. So it's the same body as the 7.9-inch iPad Mini 4, except I think they moved the microphone, so some old cases won't work quite right because they'll block the microphone. Other than that, it's the same. Yep, so that's all I had for that one. If you're choosing an iPad, you've now got basically 5 models to start from: the Mini, the iPad Mini, the iPad Air, or 2 different sizes of iPad Pro. So looking at that picture, the 2 on the left are the iPad Pros, and the 3 on the right are the Air, the standard iPad, and the iPad Mini. So that gives you an idea of the size comparison. So you can see that the Air is a little bit taller than the 9.7-inch iPad.
Wasn't 9.7 the Air?
Yeah, the names. Apple keeps changing the names on us.
It's
So the standard iPad has been through iPad, iPad 2, new iPad, which is iPad 3, iPad 4, 4th generation, iPad Air 2, iPad, which is iPad 5th generation, and iPad, which is iPad 6th generation. They can't make their minds up what they're calling things. I hate it. I started calling this new one iPad Air 3 straight away, and it turned out after the day later it was actually the iPad Air brackets 3rd generation as the official name. So, yeah. So anyway, so those are the official names I've used at the bottom, just to confuse us further. That's a price chart, and I've got mostly that's covering the Wi-Fi models. I've added a column on the right just to give you an idea of how much more it costs to get the cellular ones. So the storage capacity along the top and the iPad model down the left. So if you're starting from an iPad Air as your baseline, $849 is the starting point. You can then get cheaper by getting either a standard iPad or an iPad mini, or you can get a lot more expensive by going up to an iPad Pro. And then there's a question of how much capacity you want and whether you want cellular data for it. Notice that the standard iPad is half the capacity stepped off from the rest of them. Most of them are 64 gig or 256. The standard iPad is only 32 or 128, so they're shaving a bit of money off the value off it by halving the capacity in effect at the starting point. 32 gig is usually plenty as long as you don't want to store a lot of photos and things on it. 64 is, for most people, fine. The person I was helping chose a 256, and as it turns out their photo library is a bit bigger than 60 gigs, so it would have completely filled a 64 gig iPad. So you might just want to consider that as a possible reason to get a larger one. And that only matters if you are storing all the photos in full quality on your iPad. If you're using Apple's iCloud photo library, it can keep the full quality copies in iCloud and only download thumbnails, so it doesn't actually matter if you have a lower capacity iPad in that case. So all of them have 10-hour battery life. All of them have features that you may have been missing out on older iPads. So they all have a Retina display, they all support Siri, they all support AirDrop and handoff features for the continuity stuff. All of them support all the multitasking features. So back with this generation, the iPad Air, this one doesn't do split view. It does do the other two features. So that's the original iPad Air from 2013. The colours available, all of them do silver or space grey. The non-Pro models also do gold. So Apple decided that gold wasn't a professional colour, so they didn't offer it for the iPad Pro.
Says more about Apple than people buying.
If you want to use a keyboard with the iPad, it's worth noting that you can use any Bluetooth keyboard. You don't have to use Apple's smart keyboard or anything Apple specific at all. If you can get a cheap Bluetooth keyboard from somewhere that you're happy with, then that will work fine. You can't use a mouse or a trackpad with an iPad. They have no cursor on the screen. No, you have to use your finger to touch things. There are also many of the iPad models, I haven't bothered going into details, but there are Logitech keyboard cases which sort of fit on the iPad and attach to it and actually have a built-in keyboard which has movable keys, which is a different option to Apple's smart keyboards, and there's also a few more options there. My partner's son had an original iPad mini and he used a third-party keyboard which he managed to break, and then we got another one, so different brands. The second one, I forget what the broken one was. But the iPad mini is small enough that a iPad mini size keyboard is very dinky, but the standard size iPad is not too bad, and the iPad Air is perfectly okay in terms of size of keyboard. So if you're choosing an iPad, assume as a starting point the iPad Air is the one you would want. So think of that as your default choice. So it gives you a good combination of basically all the feature set without going overboard, and it's reasonably light and it's got a good size, and it's big enough for pretty much everything, and it does everything that an iPad can do, with the exception of some of the more advanced features that are only on the Pro models. It's got the latest processor, and that means you should be able to expect software updates for 5.5 years if Apple sticks with their current pattern of dropping one processor every iOS version. They may stretch it again, in which case it's better than the 5.5 years. So I don't think they're likely to shorten it again. So that's the sort of just my projection estimate. You can choose 64 or 256 gig capacity, whether or not it's got Wi-Fi or cellular data, and what colour. And you can also add to it a smart keyboard, Apple Pencil, Logitech Crayon, or a variety of third-party options, plus there's covers, which I haven't bothered to mention, the smart covers and things like that. No, I haven't. It's a sub-feature of the latest A12 processor. So it's a single bullet underneath a single bullet. It's not quite right, but yeah. And that's 849 because I'm just referring back to the early data again there. So specific details about the iPad Air. It has a lightning connector, so if you're already used to that, it's the same connector. It has a 3.5mm headphone socket, so if you like using headphones with an iPad, you can still do that. It's got 2 speakers on one side, which is the same as all the earlier iPads. So basically means if you're listening to video, if you're watching a movie, for example, with just using the speakers, all the audio is going to come out one side. It won't give you stereo. But it's fine for listening to music in an upright position or something like that because you get enough reflected audio that it works fine. The rear camera is 8 megapixels, the front one's 7 megapixels, which is an improvement over the previous generation, I think. It has Touch ID on the home button, so if you're used to Touch ID already, or you can optionally use Touch ID anyway, but it has a home button and wide enough bezels that you can hold it by them. And the display has got most but not all of the features from the iPad Pro. So it's got True Tone, which means that if you are in incandescent light, it will adapt the white balance to go down to a yellower tint. If you're in fluorescent light, it will be bluer. If you're outlight, it will be even brighter. Outside, it will be even brighter. It also supports wide colours, which they call the P3 colour gamut, which means that it has a wider range of colours that can accurately represent on the screen. So certain shades of, as opposed to sRGB, yeah, which is the lower rated one. So it's, I don't remember off the top of my head, I think it's some red shades which can do better than the older standards. It's also fully laminated. Now that means that if some of the older iPad models, the actual LCD display is one layer inside it and then there's a sheet of glass on top of it. So if it's fully laminated, it means that the LCD is actually attached directly to the back of the glass. That means if the glass breaks, the LCD panel breaks. So you don't want to break it. But it also means that the display is closer to the surface and it actually seems more like you're looking directly at the display rather than looking at it through a pane of glass. So, for example, if you're using a pencil with it, it feels like you're drawing on the content rather than somewhat removed from the content. It does make a noticeable difference. I haven't used it heavily myself, but all of the iPads I've used with a pencil have been fully laminated displays, and it's very nice. You don't get a sort of visible gap between the tip of your pencil and the screen, that sort of thing. It supports, because it's got the A12, it's got the neural engine, which means if you care about augmented reality, which is where you're having things appear in real photos. So I used it, I won't show you right now, but I used this feature recently on my iPhone to measure a rack cabinet at work. I was able to use the Measure app to look through the camera and trace across it lines to indicate and measure the distances for the real world, and I saved that as a photo so I could refer back to it. That sort of thing. It works nicely on A11 or A12 processors, not so well on older processors that don't have that extra capability. And some apps are going to increasingly use augmented reality, so if you care about it, that's good. This is a good model for it. So the next choice down is the iPad mini. So it has a 7.9-inch display, and in effect it is the same as an iPad Air, except it doesn't support the smart keyboard, since it doesn't have the connector for it, and it's physically smaller, so there's no way you can get a reasonable sized keyboard. So there's no trade-off for performance by getting an iPad mini rather than an iPad Air. If you prefer the physically smaller size, it's definitely a worthwhile choice. It's also got the latest A12 processor. It also has software updates for 5.5 years, same as the iPad Air, because they'll all be supported for just as long. Same choices of options, and one fewer choice in add-on things because you don't get the smart keyboard. And it's cheaper. $679 is the cheapest model, so if you want to save some money and get one that's capable and you don't mind the smaller screen and everything, then that's a reasonable choice. So obviously it's smaller and lighter. I didn't actually put the number in here, but it's can't remember. It's something in the order of 300 grams rather than 420, I think. I'll have to look it up to confirm that. So it's quite a lot lighter. If you're going to be holding it like reading a book or something like that, you will notice it reasonably quickly because it's so much lighter. Doesn't support smart keyboard, which I've mentioned. Now, the main thing to be aware of is that its screen is higher density. All the pixels are shrunk. It's got the same content as a 9.7-inch iPad, but shrunk down to the smaller screen, which means everything on the screen is smaller. The keyboard all text, all graphics is all physically smaller, which means if you have trouble reading small text, it will be harder to read stuff on an iPad mini than it is on a normal iPad. You can adjust that to some extent, not to the degree that you can with larger iPhone models. You can turn it sideways, you can pinch to zoom on web pages, that sort of thing's easy enough. But for bits of the user interface, it's not so easy. You can use zooming features.
She's got one of these and she's set up the text size.
Oh, you can adjust the text size, yep. So you can make things bigger, but then it's harder to fit stuff on the screen. Yeah. So it may be a bit harder to hit things because the buttons are all smaller, so you have to aim more carefully. Its on-screen keyboard is smaller, so you're having to hunt and peck more than being able to spread your hands out. So if you use touch typing, I was using the iPad Air to type something. I was actually startled how easy it was to actually just. I was actually two-finger pecking, but I knew where the keys were, so I could just go. I made no errors. It was amazingly easy because the keys were big enough. But the iPad Mini, it's like using an iPhone keyboard. You've got to carefully aim at the keys, so it's definitely harder. 300.5. There we go. About 300. Yep. Yeah, excellent. Okay. So, if you want to save money and you want an iPad, the standard iPad is the cheapest option. So it's 9.7 inch, which is the same as all the older iPads going right back to the original one. It's a 2 generation old, even though it's only a year old model, it's actually an older processor. So it's already 2 generations out of date, which means you may only get 3.5 years of software updates. So this may be a case of penny wise, pound foolish, because if you actually save the $300-ish and buy the cheaper iPad, you may find that you're only going to get 3 or 4 years out of it before you might need to consider replacing it. Whereas you get an extra 1.5 years or so, or a couple of years with the iPad Air. The storage capacities are smaller, of course. You still get Wi-Fi or cellular and choose colours. You can use Apple Pencil and you can use Logitech Crayon as well, which I can mention later if we have time. And that's $539, so it's gone down from 800 and something to 500 and something as a starting point. So it's definitely a lot cheaper. If you want to get an iPad for the kids, for example, and you don't really want to spend $800 on it, then this is probably a reasonable choice, but keep in mind that it may have 2 years less usable life out of it compared to later models. The main thing, the reason they save money is they didn't fully laminate the display, so it has a separate sheet of glass. There is an advantage to that. If the glass breaks, then it's easier to repair it, as long as the screen hasn't broken as well. So if you just cracked the glass, that's more repairable, it's cheaper to repair than a later model which has a fully laminated display. Which again is a reason why this might be a better model for kids to use, because they're more likely to break it. And I mentioned that schools tend to use this one rather than all the more expensive models because of that. Apart from that, it's cheaper in the first place. But I've described the stuff already, so the visible gap makes it seem a little bit like you're disconnected from the display when you're using it, so it's a little bit different. The iPad does not have a true tone display, which means that if your screen will tend to look too blue and under incandescent light if you've got it set to more or less normal settings. And it's also not P3 gamut, it's only sRGB, so some colours won't be quite as accurate. But it's fine for most stuff, it's just your photos may not look quite as colour accurate as they would on other models. It weighs almost exactly the same as the iPad Air, so you don't gain any lightness factor by getting a smaller iPad. It's just more dense, in effect. There is no smart keyboard for the standard iPad, but the on-screen keys are big enough that it's usable. The iPad Air is slightly better because they're physically larger keys, but the standard iPad is fine. I use my standard iPad to do a fair amount of on-screen typing, and I've never bothered to. I have actually got an external keyboard. I occasionally use the iPad, but I do large-scale typing on it so infrequently I don't bother using it normally. The camera is a significant downgrade. It's only one front camera that it's only 1.2 megapixels compared to 7 for the iPad Air, so the FaceTime camera is not as good quality. But the back camera I think is still 8 megapixels, so there's no downgrade there. Doesn't have the neural engine, which will limit the augmented reality capabilities. So then you get the iPad Pro. So the person I was helping was actually pondering buying an iPad Pro until I said, hang on a second, why do you think you need an iPad Pro? So they come with an 11 or a 12.9 inch display. Consider them as high-end models with high-end features and high-end prices. So $849, if I remember right, for the iPad Air. The iPad Pro starts at $1,399 for a similar sized model. It has an A12X processor, and that's the same as the A12 but with more cores, so it can do more parallel processing and it's got better graphics. So anything involving lots of either complex graphics or running complex applications, that sort of thing, is going to benefit on an iPad Pro. Same generation, so same support time frame. Storage capacity goes up to 1 terabyte for vast amounts of money, so there's bigger options. It's also worth mentioning, if you did buy the 1 terabyte model, it's got more RAM inside that particular model to allow you to work with bigger documents in memory. So it's got even better performance if you're using it for high-end artwork or something like that in Photoshop or something. Same options as the iPad Air, Smart Keyboard, Apple Pencil and Logitech Crayon. It's worth noting those are a different Smart Keyboard and Apple Pencil than the one you use on the iPad Air. And $13.99 I mentioned, that's the cheapest price for an iPad Pro. So what do you get? It's got Face ID rather than Touch ID, so there's no home button, and that also means the bezels around the edge, I've done this in a different order, thinner bezels all the way around the edge. The screen goes closer to the edge of the iPad rather than having tall top and bottom bits. So it can be. The comments are basically that it's not too bad because it has good hand rejection stuff, so it tends not to notice. There is one problem. The Face ID camera is in one particular edge, and if you want to unlock it and you happen to be holding it by that edge, it says, please remove your hand, or something like that. I can't see you. Yeah, don't drop it. You hold it by the other side, it's fine, or it's basically in one of the short ends, and it's so symmetrical you can't really tell which way it is, so you don't really notice it. I haven't used one yet, but I've had a closer look at them. So it has a USB-C connector rather than a Lightning connector. So at the moment, that just means it's different, but as more and more stuff goes to USB-C and more capabilities are added, it's going to mean probably there's more things you can do with an iPad Pro than you can with a Lightning connector on every other iPad. So that's more flexibility, basically. One example of that is that people are already making, again finding the right bag, gadgets which plug into the iPad Pro. I got one of these from a Kickstarter campaign. This is an iPad Pro specific dock. So it's got a USB-C connector. It's sized correctly to grip the edges of the iPad Pro to hold on firmly, and it's got an HDMI connector, USB-C for power input, micro SD and SD, and a single USB-A port and audio output. So you can plug that in and get all that functionality built in. Unfortunately, it appears this particular one has got some teething problems, but hopefully most of them have been fixed by the software update. And I haven't used it yet because I don't have an iPad Pro. So I bought this just to help the Kickstarter campaign and have it ready and waiting. And it came in a nice little carry case with a adapter cable, extender cable if you happen to want to use it with something which is not an iPad Pro. So I can test it with my Mac Mini, for example, because it's got this little T-shaped cable, so that you have to unscrew the head end and then that plugs in there, and then that gives it a little extension cable. So and they give you the tools for doing that as well. So that's quite cute. So if I put that back in again, and I think the carry cases, that was all Kickstarter special. So you can't use existing Lightning cables and peripherals because there's no Lightning plug-in, no way to plug them in, there's no adapters or anything you can get. So if you are heavily invested in Lightning stuff like camera adapters, they won't work with an iPad Pro. You need new ones. The iPad Pro does not have a 3.5-inch headphone socket. The only way you can get audio out of it via a wire is to use the USB-C socket, which is where gadgets like that which have their own headphone socket on it come in handy, because that gives you one back again. Or you can use Bluetooth, obviously, or you can use a USB-C to headphone adapter. They're readily available, so you can get a 3.5mm thing which plugs in to that port. So you just can't plug headphones in at the same time. But personally, I think the number of times I've used headphones in any of my iPads that I've ever owned is probably once. I've almost never used the headphone socket, but other people might have different experience.
There is one comment, is that if you've got a phone, then it's not worth getting iPads with connectivity, just get a Wi-Fi.
Yeah, usually that's the case.
And we've gone overseas with just an iPad and a phone, and that's all you need, and it's just a Wi-Fi iPad.
My attitude is I've always bought iPads with cellular data because it gives me extra flexibility. It means that I have a second device with a cellular connection.
But it's another outgoing
Exactly. Except I happened to have lucked out and picked the right time to get the plan because Vodafone gave it to me for free. So I have an iPad linked to my iPhone Vodafone account with no extra cost involved. I've basically got two phone numbers linked to the same account. So means I can use the iPhone's personal hotspot to make the iPad's personal hotspot to make the iPhone think it's on a Wi-Fi network. We can do software updates via the cellular network, which you can't do any other way, so unless you're on Wi-Fi. So it's handy having that extra flexibility. It's also worth noting the cellular model has GPS, whereas the non-cellular models don't. So if you want to do any GPS-based mapping stuff, it's better getting the cellular model, even if you don't have a SIM card in it, because then you get GPS if you're out off network and you're running mapping stuff or something like that. Every iPad with cellular, that's always been the case. GPS is only a feature associated with the cellular feature. So the iPad Pro has 4 speakers, which I can tell you makes a massive difference if you're watching video, because and they're pretty good speakers as well. You get audio out both sides. Here's my earlier model iPad Pro. So you can see there it's got speaker, 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 speaker. So this is the first generation iPad Pro, not the new design. So I'm not in a hurry to replace it because it still works perfectly well and it's still very, very fast compared to everything else. But the nice thing about this is it uses them for treble and bass. And if you hold it this way, it uses that one for left and that one for right and that one for treble and that one for bass. If you hold it this way, it uses that one for left and that one for right and that one for treble and that one for bass. It auto-rotates the audio according to which way you're holding it. It's very clever. I do very much like the audio of that iPad. It's good enough just for listening to music and things like that, and for watching movies if you're not using headphones. I mentioned earlier that the highest capacity iPad Pro has more RAM. All of them have got more RAM anyway. It's 3 gigabytes of RAM versus 4 gigabytes of RAM in the iPad Pro, but you go up to 6 gigabytes if you get the highest capacity iPad Pro. So that helps if you're running high-end applications. So again, if you're running anything which is going to involve lots of working on very large and complex documents, you'll probably find the iPad Pro handles it better than other iPads just because it's got more RAM. Narrower bezels I've mentioned briefly, and it's also got rounded display corners, so the corners are curved off on the actual display, not just the outer edge, but the inner edge of the corners is rounded. So, whereas all the other iPads have got square corners, so there's some apps don't like that and they get a bit confused, so you need to make sure your apps are updated to handle the iPad Pro. An extra feature that's only on the Pro models is something called ProMotion, which my one's missing because it's too old, but the later models had it. What that does is the screen refreshes it up to 120 Hz rather than just a fixed rate of 60 Hz, but it can slow down according to the speed of whatever you're watching. So if you're watching a movie that's at 24 frames per second, the screen will refresh at 24 frames per second, whereas other iPads refresh it at 60 frames per second and have to do frame doubling and other things, so you end up getting slight tearing effects when there's fast movement, that sort of thing. So it looks better, basically, if you're watching video, is the way to think about it. It also potentially saves power, but that's just hidden in the general stats. Yeah, last year had it in all models, so 2017 did, so it's not in the 2015 models, which is what I've got. The camera is improved. The rear camera goes up to 12 megapixels and it adds True Tone Flash, which is a four-element flash module, so you can take flash photos with the iPad Pro, but you can't with the iPad Air. It also supports 4K video recording, which you can't do with the smaller model. So if you actually want to use 4K video and record it on an iPad, you want the iPad Pro. If you're recording it with something else, it doesn't matter quite so much, but the iPad Pro's extra performance may help for editing as well. The front camera is the same resolution, but it supports portrait mode, which is where it can take a photo of you and blur the background. So the bokeh effect, as they call it, and also portrait lighting, where it uses the entire screen as a flash to illuminate your face. No, that's not it. That's the flash feature. Portrait lighting is where it's able to sense where your face is in the picture, and after you've taken the photo, you can add effects, and it will accurately adapt to, like you can create sepia effects or change the color effects and things like that. I haven't actually had a play with that. The iPhone supports it as well. It's a feature of having the Face ID camera technology. And of course, Animoji and Memoji, which is where you can map your face movements onto a dinosaur or a skull or whatever it might be, or create a mocked up representation of yourself. Sorry? Oh, they keep adding new ones. I used it once every time they come out with a new version, I've used it once to amuse myself. That's it. Never touched it again. But kids love it, I'm sure. The optional Apple Pencil is the second generation one, which cost $200. I don't actually have one, but I'll get my first one, generation one, out now, just because we're about to talk about it. It's more expensive, and it's a better design overall, but I'll come back to that. So I'll just remove that. I'll just dig out the Apple Pencil. There it is. Yep. And it has a different smart keyboard design as well. The iPad Air's smart keyboard, basically it flaps around the front and covers the front of the iPad while it's closed. When it opens up, it comes down that way, and it's got a kind of a that sort of shape on the back. The iPad Pros, and I think it can also flap around the back and half cover it as well. I can't remember now. You can get it out of the way anyway. There's a rotate around the back and cover up. The iPad Pros one actually covers the entire iPad. It goes around the corners, covers the back, and pops out the front. When it's closed, the keyboard is actually backwards, so you can feel the keys on the back of the iPad while you're flipping it around the back, which feels weird, but it disables the keyboard while it's in that state, so it doesn't actually cause any problems. It just feels weird. So, yeah. The 11-inch iPad Pro is again about the same weight as the iPad Air, so 9.7, 10.5 or 11-inch iPads are all pretty much the same weight, and you won't notice the difference. Obviously the 12.9 one is heavier, it's bigger, but it's still lighter than the original iPad. If you ever held one of those, it was a bit of a heavy beast compared to later ones. The iPad 2 was a lot lighter, and everything else since then has got lighter, apart from the 3 and the 4. The original iPad, the iPad 3 and the iPad 4 are the three heaviest ones. Everything else is lighter. So the reason you might want to get the 12.9, obviously you've got a bigger screen, more pixels, you can see more stuff, you can zoom into more detail, everything like that. So it's the same size screen as my one here, so if you're not sure what they look like, it's if I hold that up, I'm saying there it's almost big enough to be an A4 sheet of paper. If I hold a sheet of A4 paper, you can see it's nearly the right width, not quite, but the length is a little bit short. So it's getting close, but not quite there. But it's not far off that you can get a pretty good approximation of what will you fit on an A4 sheet of paper with this. So I find that it's sometimes handy for drawing stuff. So drawing options. All of the current iPad models support some version of the Apple Pencil. The iPad, iPad Air and iPad Mini use the Apple Pencil 1, which I've got my one here. So that now costs $159. It came down in price when they were originally released. This one also works with the earlier iPad Pro models and the 2017 iPad. The current iPad Pros, which is the new design with Face ID, use the Apple Pencil 2, which is more expensive. And all of the current models support the Logitech Crayon, which is a new option that was released last year with the standard iPad for schools, and then Apple decided or Logitech decided they could start selling it to everybody, so it wasn't available to the public until reasonably recently. So this is the Apple Pencil 1, so I've got one here so I can show you. The cap comes off, so there's your lightning plug on the end to plug it into the iPad to charge. I've also got, but not handy, the double plug adapter, which gives you a female plug on the end if you want to charge it using an external cable. That holds on magnetically and is easily lost. Luckily I haven't lost mine. The tip on the end is removable, so if it wears out as a rubberized tip, you can actually replace the tip and get new ones. So that it will wear out eventually, but I haven't used mine enough to be a problem. You get two with it anyway, yep. Yeah. So just repeating the list of models it supports. To recharge it, you basically plug it into your iPad, so you take it and plug it into the lightning socket like that. So do not use your iPad like a lollipop. It will break. But that will charge the iPad Pencil and does it pretty quickly as well. You don't need to leave it in for very long because it's quite a small battery in here compared to the iPad. And I don't even notice it draining the battery in the iPad in terms of battery level. A few seconds is enough to give you several minutes of use or something like that, so I can't remember the exact numbers now. So it's got a rounded body, completely round, and it's weighted, so if I try and roll it, you can see it's not rolling smoothly. The table's not level, but it will tend to roll. So if you're on a smooth enough table, it will probably fall off and get lost somewhere, so you've got to be aware of that. It's also a smooth surface, which means it's a bit slippery to hold, which is a bit irritating. Apple sells, they didn't originally, I never bought one, a pencil case, which adds another $55 to the cost, which is basically a leather case you can put the pencil in to hold it in place. Some of the iPads have also offered a pencil holder in the leather folio case, which you can put the pencil in via a little slot on the top. It's also worth mentioning a third-party option, which still isn't available in New Zealand, but I bought one. It's this little thing here. It's a magnetic cover from Moxieware, which basically slides over your Apple Pencil and holds reasonably firmly in place, and it's got a magnet in it, which means you can do this. Attach your pencil to your iPad. Leave it sitting on the cover of the iPad so it doesn't go wandering. I find that very useful, and I'm glad I bought that, and it costs a grand total of $17 US plus shipping. So, and they're available in multiple colours. I chose blue because I like blue, but so if you have got an Apple Pencil one, that's quite a convenient way of stopping it from wandering. So, yeah. The Apple Pencil 2, by comparison, has no removable parts apart from the tip, so there's no cap to get lost, so that's an improvement. It's similar, I think it's the same size, only works on the iPad Pros, the latest models, that is. It attaches magnetically to the iPad Pro. There's actually a designated docking area on the iPad Pro, which is on this side, I think. So the pencil, you just sit the pencil on top of the iPad Pro, it attaches to it with magnets, and while it's there, it pairs with the iPad and it charges it. So it's actually inductive charging like the Apple Watch from the iPad to the pencil. There's nothing to plug in. It has a rounded body, but one edge has got a flat side, so that means it's even less likely to roll than the original one. It's also a bit more comfortable to hold because they've given it a matte surface rather than a smooth surface. And they've added a double tap gesture, so I can't do it with this one, but if you can imagine, you can do that sort of gesture with it, and whichever app you're using can decide what that means. It often means change between two different tools, like the hand tool for dragging and the pointer tool for drawing, or whatever it might be. So you can usually customise that. The Logitech Crayon looks like that, so it's a little bit more colourful. That one works on basically all the current models, plus last year's 2017 iPad, but not any of the older Pro models, which supported the Apple Pencil, so as far as I know. I haven't tried one yet, so I'll be interested to test that to see whether it actually does work, and just hasn't been announced that it supports them. It's a kind of an oval-shaped body, so it's if you can picture that, it's more like that kind of shape there. You can see it's. Sorry? Yeah, pretty much. Yep. So it's sort of it's aimed for kids' hands more than precise drawing kind of tasks. It doesn't have a pressure-sensitive tip, so if you use an Apple Pencil, you can actually do artwork where as you push harder, it generates a thicker stroke, so you can do better artwork. I tend to use mine mostly for sketching and tapping small things on the screen, so I don't notice, or handwriting, so I don't really care about that, but it's sometimes handy. So this one doesn't, so you get constant line thickness, basically. It charges using a lightning cable. The little cap at the top flips over, and there's a lightning socket behind it, so you just plug in a lightning cable to recharge it. So it doesn't have quite the same charging and pairing convenience factor as the Apple Pencil, but it's a lot cheaper. It's only $115 rather than $160. So I haven't seen any of them yet anywhere, so I don't know who sells them, but Apple's online store does at least. Okay, I've run out of time, so we're not going to get to talk about pages, numbers and keynote stuff tonight. We can defer that. Any iPad questions? And as I said, I can make this presentation available in the near future, so you can review it at your leisure. Okay? Okay? No questions? Which one? That one? Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, for that one I can also make available. That's a bit tricky because it requires quite a large screen to see everything, but at least you can scroll around it to have a look at the details. But all that information is available in piecemeal fashion on Apple's website, just by going into each of the models and choosing the select thing, and you can see you can change the prices. So all I've done is I've collated it all into one table. Yep. So it's possibly useful.
I mean, you could shrink it down.
Yeah, that's already using pretty small text even on the screen, so it's actually using a table I created in the older version of Numbers before they made all the text bigger. So if I made that table again now, it would be bigger text to start with.
Photograph works.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I can zoom it, but it looks weird.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah, hang on, let me just reposition it again.
just zoom in.
Would it work in landscape?
Yeah.
Yes.
How do I go onto there? If I go zoom 125%, that's probably about right. Yeah. That's about as good as it's going to get without funny scaling.
It's quite readable.
Okay.
Do you think you'll try it or shall we photograph it?
Well, I'll share it anyway, so there's no need to worry about taking a photo. But if you want it right now because you're making decisions, then it's helpful to have that. And
You said before about GPS, it's only in the
Yeah.
cellular.
Yes.
Photos, when you take a photo, it knows where it is.
Only if it's got enough information available. If you have GPS and it's had time to get a fix, it will be accurate to a much greater degree than the non-cellular
So I noticed
iPad.
the photos taken overseas.
Yeah.
On an
Now
iPad.
the trick is, even without GPS, the iPad has other things it can get clues from as to where it is. The major one is if you are in range of any Wi-Fi network, even if not connected to it, and Apple knows where that Wi-Fi network is, it will have an approximate location because it knows where the Wi-Fi base station is. So as long as you are in urban areas, around built-up areas that have got their own Wi-Fi networks, any Wi-Fi network in range is going to give your iPad an approximate location. So that's the major way it finds its location.
Yeah.
So one area where the GPS might matter is Find My iPad, because it can pinpoint it far more accurately than somewhere within range of this Wi-Fi network, because that will give you a much bigger circle that you can't find within that. The other case where it will matter is if you're going away from Wi-Fi networks, if you're going out and doing anything like orienteering or that sort of thing, or out in the wilds, then the GPS will give you accurate locations if you're out in the middle of Kaharangi National Park or wherever it might be and you want to take a photo with the iPad. Whereas the cellular model will have GPS information available, the Wi-Fi model won't. I did hear a rumour at some stage that the iPhone, if you have your iPhone nearby, it can actually get the GPS data from the iPhone to tag the pictures on the iPad. I'm not sure about that.
Even though it's not.
Yeah, I've never actually bothered testing that with a Wi-Fi on the iPad to see whether it's true or not. But yeah, maybe. Yeah, you kind of expect that's the sort of thing Apple would do to try and make things better. So yeah, but if the only thing you're carrying with you is the iPad, or you don't have an iPhone, if you've got an Android phone or something instead, then that option's not going to be there. Yeah. No, it's not a phone. You can't make phone calls, you can't do text messages, but you can do cellular data. So if, for example, you use Skype, it can use cellular data to talk to people via Skype, or similar other options, FaceTime, messages, but only iMessage, not text messaging.
So it means that instead of having to use, say, free Wi-Fi somewhere, it's going to be everywhere.
Everywhere that you've got cell phone coverage.
You've got cell phone.
Yeah. So as an example of that, one reason I like having the cellular ones, I've got some friends who got a beach house up at Waikawa Beach, which is north of Otaki, and it's sort of off the coast from Manukau, if you know where Manukau is. The coverage, cell phone coverage there is on the edge of non-existent. You have to find the right spot to get a good cell phone signal. I have found that in their lounge there is a good spot on top of the cabinet. I leave my iPad sitting there with cellular data, and I use personal hotspot, and I get good coverage everywhere in the house because the iPad is providing the Wi-Fi connection and accessing cellular data. So, but if you're in better cell phone coverage, that doesn't matter so much because your phone will be fine and you can share your phones. Sorry?
You can have the beach to get away from.
Oh yeah, but occasionally I can't get away completely. I go for a walk on the beach if I want to get away from it. Ironically, the beach itself has better cell phone coverage than the house does because I can see further. There's not less obstacles. Yeah. I don't think there's any cell sites on Kapiti Island, but if there were, it'd be quite good because it's in direct line of sight. Yes, the birds might pick the cell sites indeed. Okay, any last requests?
Yes, we wanted our home and take
Yep.
a screen.
Of course. I think we'll stop now. Thank you.